Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. So imagine her wife, right? She's sitting on the couch with her husband. He's not yelling. He's not cheating. He's not threatening her, but yet she feels anxious every time he walks into the room. Why? Why does this happen? Right? Because it's something that a lot of people question, and I'm sure that you're thinking the same thing. But you tell me, why does that happen? He's not threatening her. There's nothing we see that he's just walking into the room. Why does this happen, ladies and gentlemen? Why? Hit the like button, share, subscribe, turn up your notifications. Maybe because emotional safety isn't about physical danger, just maybe, right? But today we're going to spend some time on that, right? Maybe there's something about predictability that we've been discussing over the previous episode. On a previous episode, we talk about apologies destroying trust, right? And when somebody doesn't really know what part of you, which version of you they're going to get, what do you expect might happen? If there's, some people have different personalities, right? Do they get excited when you come around, or do they stop relaxing around you entirely? Maybe they don't. What exactly is your expectation? In that moment, as a husband, you're just walking into the room. Nothing special, right? All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe, turn up your notifications so you're notified when we drop these videos and live sessions. Today, we're going to spend some time talking about I don't feel safe. Now, before we dive too far into this story, if your marriage is actively in a crisis state right now and you cannot afford to wait for these daily breakdowns to figure out piece by piece, go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery right now and book a one-on-one discovery session with me so we can map out your exact scenario privately. Just go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. Now, let's get into the business of the day. We have some things to talk about. Let's talk about why your partner don't feel safe with you, shall we? Welcome. Hit the like button, share, subscribe, turn up your notification. Again, imagine a wife sitting on a couch with her husband. He's not yelling, he's not cheating, and he's not, at least from what we can see, there's no threat. He's not threatening her, right? It's not threatening her, guys. Yet she feels anxious every time he walks into the room. Why? I'll tell you why. Because emotional safety is not the same thing as physical danger. It's about emotional predictability, and when someone doesn't really know, or they're not sure what version of you they're gonna get today, they stop relaxing around you. But I want to prove that to you. I don't want to just say that, right? Because if I say that, then it's just my words, right? But I want to prove that to you. So, like I said, let's talk about why your partner doesn't feel safe with you. Your partner doesn't feel safe with you. All right, so that's one side of it, but let's also change it around, right? How about why you, as if I knew that was about to come, but this one is why you don't feel safe with your partner. On the previous episode, we talked about different stories, different topics, same pattern. All right. So of course today we're going to, we're also going to talk about the patterns, right? We're going to identify the patterns so you can finally solve this issue, right? So, because most of us, naturally speaking, we focus on the actual behavior itself, which is why we're super judgmental when it comes to this topic, because we're like, hey, you're focusing on the actual behavior, right? As opposed to trying to identify the pattern so you can actually solve the problem at its root. That's where most people struggle. All right. People don't open up when they feel loved. Naturally, they just don't. Okay. They open up when they feel safe. Okay. When they feel safe. Love attracts. Safety allows for connection. All right. Now, this is the distinct difference that we need to draw today. Feeling loved versus feeling safe. They're not the same thing. As a matter of fact, let's put this. Most people think they're the same thing. If you ask them, especially you ladies, if you ask them feeling loved, feeling safe, they're not the same thing. Okay, that's why you see some people say, yeah, I think he loves me. But, wait, what do you mean but? Why are you adding but into that equation? What do you mean but? Well, she doesn't feel safe. What does that mean? I don't hurt her, right? I didn't do anything to her. Why would she not feel safe? By the way, it might not be about you, but it becomes your responsibility. Why? Because this is the real world. We live in the real world, guys. It's not just because you're a good person. Hello, babes. Good to see you. Good morning. Welcome. You showed up just in time. Feeling loved is not the same thing as feeling safe. They're two different, distinctive things in the grand scheme. Now, I do understand we use them interchangeably sometimes. That's normal. Okay? That's normal. I completely get that. So what people think is love equals to safety. Right? Let me jot that out properly. Right. What people think is love equals to safety. That's what most people think. That's what most people act on. Well, not necessarily. Most people think love equals to safety, right? If you ask them from a theoretical standpoint, that's what most people think. But reality is that people only act on if they feel safe around you. This is the reality, guys. The reality is love is not the same thing as safety. And again, I don't want to say these things just for saying sake. I'm just kind of like preparing the ground for you on what we're going to walk through today. Love is not the same thing as safety, guys. It is not. Are we making sense so far, guys? Making sense? Yes, 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 or yes, yes, or yes, yes, or yes. There you go. I want this to be bigger. That's why I want it to be bigger. No, but let me do it properly, guys. Hold on 1 second. All right. Like that. Aha. Love is not the same thing as safety. Please know this and know peace. But again, as usual, how life plays out, right? As life is playing out on a day-to-day basis, you're having an interaction with your husband or wife, and something goes left, right? And of course, it usually leads to either no safety, no sense of safety, or less safety. You don't feel easy, right? So, but it usually starts as something happened. When we say something happened, we're gonna call it an event. Okay, so let's get into that. Right, let's get into that real quick. Start from here. An event. Something happened, no harms, nobody was trying to hurt another person, but life is just happening, and an event. Sometimes we call it what? Trigger. Okay, something happened, right? Now, remember, we're moving in the direction of how safety works within a romantic relationship. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about a romantic relationship, right? There's a lot of similarity between this and other types of relationship, but there's going to be some distinct differences. I'm going to point that out before we end the show because it's very important that you have context, proper understanding of the context of what you're dealing with. If you try to treat this absolutely as just any type of relationship, that could be the very missing piece on what you're dealing with in your personal relationship, right? So what happens after, anybody feel free to chime in, what happens after an event happens that leads to less sense of safety in your relationship? I'm going to look in the comment section every time we try to get through this. What happens? What is the next thing that happens, guys? We've covered this over the previous episodes, so there's no, if you've been showing up, you should have these answers already. But it's okay, I'll walk you through it. But I want you to try what happens when an event, a trigger happens that make you feel less safe. Less safe is what you feel, but what are the things that happens behind the scene? Now, it's very important that you understand this because you might just be the culprit. And if you understood it before, a person will not feel safe around you. You might say, but what does a man need to feel safe around? Because a man doesn't need to feel safe because after all, it's the one that brings safety. Well, you're right, but you're also wrong at the same time. It depends on what context. If you're talking about sexual polarity, you're right. If you're talking about social constructs, a man still needs to feel safe. Particularly with to what extent? Well, his ego still needs to feel safe. He still needs to feel safe when it comes to psychologically speaking and his ego. What do you mean ego? Ego is a bad thing. No, ego is not outrightly a bad thing. Ego can be weaponized. Okay, it's not outrightly a bad thing. But what is the next thing that happens here? We've talked about this before, but because of time, I'm going to go ahead and give it to you. The next thing that happens whenever you say something, you do something, you be something that threatens, eventually threatens your safety in that romantic relationship. The very next thing that happens that most people don't pay attention to is interpretation, guys. Interpretation, right? You have your own interpretation for what just happened. And one of the things you can do for yourself when it comes to this conversation is learn that you actually have the power to add meanings to the events of life. Interpretation. You have that power, but many of you will leave that power in the hands of fate, Fate, or luck, or it is what it is, right? Many of you will leave that in the hands of it is what it is. It is, and that's where a lot of problems comes in, right? But what happens after interpretation? Let's go for that real quick, guys. What happens after interpretation, right? You interpret what happens, and what's the next thing that happened? What we're covering right now is we're talking about why your partner doesn't feel safe, or why you don't feel safe with your partner, your husband, your wife. Now, after this, I'm also excuse me. I'm also hold on, guys. After this, I'm also going to dive into what we call the emotional safety loop. So make sure you see that, because ultimately we're going for safety. Hello, babes. I already said hello. You didn't hear me. Yeah. After this, we're going to go for the emotional safety loop. It's very important that you see that part. But what happens after interpretation? What happens after interpretation is something that all of us, we don't have a choice. The men will swear up and down. They don't do this, but it's the reality. It's called emotions. Okay? Emotion will get provoked by your interpretation, right? The emotion kicks in. The emotion is always a part of the equation. Okay, so if your emotions tells you that if it comes anything close to threatening, what happens after the emotion? What would you naturally do if what just happened has been interpreted by you and your emotion as threatening, as a threat, right? So I'm going to put threat right next to this here somewhere, right? Somewhere here, there's a threat. You know, it doesn't have to be a physical threat, guys. It's almost never a physical threat. Let's put this here like this, right? It's usually some kind of emotional threat, but your emotions have helped you interpret this as some kind of threat, right? So what happens after that? What happens after what is the next thing you do? Sometimes you do this from a physical standpoint, sometimes it's psychological, sometimes it's also still at an emotional level. What do you do after that? The next thing you do, as you should, right, as per normal, is called protection. You protect yourself. This is why you don't feel safe around your husband or your wife. You're protecting yourself. It doesn't really make obvious sense, right? You know why it doesn't make any obvious sense? Because this is somebody that you still have sex with sometimes. This is somebody you're supposed to be romantically involved with. So it's not really making sense that you will feel the need to protect yourself from this person. Nonetheless, that's what tends to happen, guys. That's what tends to happen. But there's more because we didn't get there yet, right? We don't want to jump into conclusions. Where we're heading is less safety. Now, this next step in that chain of reactions is something we've spoken about in this series. If you are coming here by now, you should have mastered this, but it's okay. That's why I'm here. What happens next, guys? What happens next? Anybody knows what happened next? Anybody want to give it a shot? You have an event, a trigger. It leads to interpretation. Your interpretation interprets it as an emotional threat, right? Because your emotions are now involved, right? And that leads to you feeling the need to protect yourself. What happens after you protect yourself? Well, it's not something you do, but it just naturally is like the natural next best step, right? It's called distance. We've spoken about this, guys. It's called distance. But we will continue to talk about it because the idea of this is mastery. I want you to see these things happening before they actually happen so you can know how to actually protect not just you, but protect your relationship, as long as it's a relationship worth fighting for, right? What happens is distance. Okay, because you're protecting yourself from the very person that you're supposed to love. Okay, and then after that, that's when you can now say, okay, that distance at that point you can know that you are at a place of less safety or almost no safety, or a sense of you don't feel safe. This is when people say they don't feel safe. These are the steps, these are the things, these are the chain of reactions that happen behind the scenes before you conclude that you feel less safe. Okay? Less safe in that marriage, in that relationship, in that romantic relationship. Now you feel safe. So that's like that's a problem, because you're supposed to feel safe in that relationship, right? Yeah, makes sense. All right, good. So now let's move on. I wanted to spend some time to talk about the emotional safety loop that you're actually looking to achieve. Okay, the emotional safety loop. This is what you're looking to achieve, either as the recipient or as the giver of safety. Again, from a sexual polarity standpoint, the man gives safety. From a social construct standpoint, in generally speaking, safety has to come from both sides. The woman needs safety from a standpoint of protection, and when I say protection, that is also still very much still we're talking about physical protection. Like, the man cannot represent a form of threat, either physically or emotionally, to the woman. But to the man, is really a lot of it is psychological at multiple layers, but more so ego. Okay, so he needs to feel safe. But for a woman, this is what is about, right? For a man, his ego has to be protected. He needs to feel that he's the champion in his own home. I hope that makes sense, right? He really needs to, because social constructs around masculinity dictates that men must be strong, must be the provider. He has to be invulnerable, not the other way around, ladies. I'm sorry. But again, there's layers to it, right? There's a place he needs to feel safe to before he can become vulnerable, right? So because of that, safety almost entirely for a man is about psychology and ego based, right? A safe relationship for him is a sanctuary from the battlefield, because he has to deal with the battlefield outside. Again, in this time and age, yes, proverbially speaking, but because it's instinctive, right? And if he doesn't feel like he's performing, providing, if he doesn't feel like he's being the alpha of his environment, that is literally his safety being threatened, right? And sometimes they call that emasculation. Sometimes the way he would express that is disrespect. And yeah, so he doesn't want to feel like he's the weakest in his environment. And what can you do to help with that? Just know it. Self-awareness, just awareness. Just a good old awareness is all it takes, because if you see that happening, then you know exactly what you need to do. You just, even if it's as simple as backing off a little bit. But again, let's talk about the emotional safety loop, guys. Let's talk about the emotional safety loop. Now, look, what I'm trying to tell you is that you need to be able to visualize some of those things before they actually happen to you, all right? But just check this out, right? What I'm teaching you right now is a universal roadmap. Everybody's story is unique, right? So every marriage is unique, has its own hidden landmines, and if you want me to look directly at a specific relationship block in your situation, all you have to do is just go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. The link is also pinned into the comment section below, and just secure one of the discovery slots available this week. Now, some of us are realizing that for the first time that safety isn't actually the issue. The issue is identifying which pattern is destroying your marriage. That's what it comes down to, right? That's exactly why I've put together a discovery session. So just go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. Okay, it's scrolling through the screen, but it's this. Let's see, where is it? Oh, interesting. Can't find it. All right, I'll put that up later on. It's scrolling through the screen. Just notice. Okay, it's right here. This one right here. All right, now let's get back into the emotional safety loop, guys. Today we're talking about why your partner doesn't feel safe with you. All right, so when it comes to the emotional safety loop, instead of calling it an event or a trigger, right, we're gonna call it something else. We're gonna call it a behavior. Right? Let's call it behavior. Yes. Let's go. Why is it red? Why is it red? Oh my God. Okay, let's leave it as red. Okay, let's leave it as red. But let's put, instead of just behavior, let's see here. Let's do this. I'm gonna put right in front of it, right here, I'm gonna put unpredictable. Because if it's predictable, you will do exactly what to do. And even some of you, after you've seen predictable behavior, instead of knowing what to do, you build resentments, right? Because you remember yesterday, you conclude that he's never gonna change. Rightfully so, because it's consistent, right? He is a pattern. So it's I'm sorry don't really make any sense to you, right? So you have an unpredictable behavior. Let's put that in parentheses, right? So it's a behavior, it's negative. What makes it negative? Well, it's just a trigger. So, but let's call it unpredictable behavior, right? So now, after unpredictable behavior, what happens, guys? What happens? Let me come to anybody in the chat want to try what happens secretly behind the scenes once you engage an unpredictable behavior by mistake in your romantic relationships. Yes, in your relationships. What happens? Remember, today we're talking about safety, feeling safe in your relationships, right? What happens if you got hit by an unpredictable behavior in your face? The word is an A word. Anybody want to try? If you want to try, feel free to try, guys. Give it a shot. What happens? Yeah? What happens? Does this give you a hint? Look at this on the screen. Does this give you a hint? Unpredictable behavior. Whatever it is. What does that do to a person when they encounter an unpredictable behavior, guys? What generally happens, guys? Let's see. All right. What about anxiety, guys? Anxiety. All right. Good old anxiety. What about that? Yeah. So after anxiety, what happens? Unpredictable behavior leading into anxiety. You're anxious. Anxiety, most people interpret it almost immediately as negative. Well, anxious also means you're anticipating. Anticipating what? Another unpredictable behavior? What exactly are you anticipating? Anticipating in this sense is not necessarily a good thing. Let's be honest. Let's call a spade, right? I always laugh whenever I say that. God help me. Anxiety, behavior, unpredictable behavior leads to anxiety. What's the next step? What's the next thing that happens if you're anxious? If particularly you're anticipating potentially the worst case scenario, worst things to happen, more worse things than what? Than the unpredictable behavior, you don't feel safe, remember? So what happens? We're gonna call it another name. We'll call it protection earlier. What else should we call it now? We're gonna call it another name to give it more understanding, so that you can know that if you're trying to justify this, you're already justified. It doesn't mean you're going to create more good results. You might just end up hurting yourself more, even if you are justified. So let's use the word, because this is supposed to be a safe sanctuary for you. This is your relationship. But what happens? Guardedness. Guardedness. You protect yourself against yourself. It's an oxymoron. It doesn't really pan out well over time, even though it's justifiable. Isn't that crazy? Even though it's justifiable, it still doesn't show up very well in terms of results. Because why are you guarded against yourself? Guardedness. Guardedness. Why are you protecting yourself against yourself? Well, you have the right to. You feel like you need to. It's your natural next thing to do when you feel anxious. So what happens after that, guys? What happens after guardedness? You're guarding yourself against your husband. I know. That's you. Remember, you're supposed to two shall become one. You're guarding yourself against your wife because you don't know if she's going to steal your money in the future. What do you mean? Why are you married to a person that could potentially steal? Why don't you just leave her? My guess is that you're selfish. You want your cake. You want to have it and eat it too at the same time. Well, that's like the rest of us too. All of us, we have these bad behaviors, right? So what happens after the guardedness? What happened after the guardedness? When you're guarded against your own partner, that leads to less communication, okay, or bad communication styles, or ineffective communication. But for now, let's just call it less. I'm going to call it ineffective communication, okay, guys? But you know, some people interpret that as less communication, but people still communicate. You're communicating just bad signals. You're still communicating. It's just bad signals. You're communicating to that other person that you don't feel safe, right? And they can feel it. They might not be able to put their fingers on it. They might be too busy to even slow down and say, let me find out what's going on with my husband, with my wife. They might feel like you're a brat. You're always throwing tantrums. They feel something. You're communicating something, but it's ineffective, right? Because this is supposed to be a relationship, a marriage for that matter. So ineffective communication, what does that lead to, guys? What does that lead to? Does that really help? This one should be obvious by now. This one should be obvious. We keep using this word all the time. So I'm trying to become more predictable here, guys. Help me, help me, help me. The emotional safety loop is what we're going through, guys. Starts with unpredictable behavior, leads to anxiety. You don't know what anxiety looks like? Check this out. From that place where he's standing, you can see that he can't see her rolling the eyes, but she's rolling her eyes. She knows something is walking up. It's unpredictable. She's not exactly scared, but she's anxious because she's still sitting in the house, right? She might even have 3 or 4 or 5 children in the other room, right? Walking, making noise and all this kind of stuff, but she's not sure what's about to. She's not sure about the rest of her life. How about that? It might not even be. Sometimes it's not like as simple as, oh, if she's going to get a slap or something. No, that's the obvious stuff. If that ever happens, you should leave that relationship. Okay, but I understand why you might not leave, because we're talking about all of it right now. What I'm trying to tell you is that if you don't feel safe about your future with this person, it needs to be fixed. That's not normal, guys. That's not normal. So what does ineffective or less communication, what does it lead to, guys? This answer is right there staring in your face, but I'm just going to put it right now. Distance. Let's make it red. Distance. Distance between you and your husband. Is that a good thing? Is that a good thing? Short term, maybe you feel like it is. At least it can leave you alone. Do your thing, right? Leave you alone to just do your thing. Live your life. Everybody to each his own. You say go their own way, but you still live in the same house. And your children are watching you teach them how to do love. Imagine. Distance. So, what does that lead to, guys? Distance leads to, no, not less safe. I know we said less safe earlier on. Remember, we're now talking about the loop. Right now, we're now talking about emotional safety loop. It is no longer just one thing leading to another, which is what we think happens. But this is in reality a loop, a vicious cycle that continues to lessen, worsen. I think I said that right, yeah? The quality of your life. Okay? So a loop is being created here. What does distance lead to? What does distance lead to in this case? Distance actually leads to because remember there's a loop. I'm telling you there's a loop here. So you have to think in terms of a vicious bad cycle. The same reason why people keep having the same fight over and over again, right? What does that lead into, guys? It leads into more anxiety, guys. More anxiety. It gets bigger. More anxiety. So if we know that anxiety leads to guardedness, ineffective communication, right? If we know that anxiety leads to guardedness, ineffective communication, and distance, what would more anxiety lead into? What would it lead into, guys? All right, so let's make it smoother. Let's make it real. Let's make it real. What would more anxiety lead into? The loop. The loop, guys. The loop. The loop. It's going to lead into the loop. This is going to loop here. Right? It's going to loop. It's going to continue to loop. Right? It's going to keep looping. Right? And it's going to keep looping. It gets bigger and bigger. And then it's going to keep looping bigger and bigger. Oh, the next one is going to be much bigger. Right? Guardedness is effective communication, right? Right? So this is just looking like this on paper, right? Right? So what happens? Sadly, guys, eventually, this will lead into, let's put this here, guys, right here. This will lead into divorce. Uh-oh. Why does it have to be that bad? Well, it's not that bad. Sometimes, some people say incompatibility. The Prestige family says, no, we know what's happening here. We can actually fix it. The Prestige family said no judgment for those who ended up being very, very bad. But we know that it can be fixed. Right? It takes awareness. It starts with awareness, guys. Awareness. It starts with good old awareness. That's where it starts from. Just knowing some of this stuff goes a long way. So, again, unpredictable behavior. I didn't even say bad behavior. All I know is unpredictable. It doesn't make you feel safe, right? Leads into anxiety. It leads into guardedness. You protect yourself against yourself, so you don't have the freedom to fly. You don't feel free to live, right? You're essentially living in a prison yard. Okay? So, of course, you're guarded, right? And that leads to ineffective communication because you don't know if you're going to say the wrong thing. Even if you are going to have a conversation, you don't know where to start from. Yeah, and that leads into distance. More distance leads to more anxiety, leads to eventually, after, if you create this big loop and it's big enough, something has to give. And unfortunately, for many people, that's divorce. For a lot of people, they might even stay in a toxic relationship for a lifetime. Meaning, their life could have been a lot more better, but they chose to, they chose to just do the easy stuff, right? Easy stuff, but less quality of life. Which is, let's just for long. Let's just admit for God that this is what it's supposed to look like. But the reality is that it doesn't have to look that way. It doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to normalize these things. You can do something about it. The first step to do about it is the fact that you're watching this video right now. So kudos to you that you're doing something about it. Okay? Kudos to you that you know to do something about this. So today we've been talking about, why your partner doesn't feel safe with you, why you don't feel safe with your partner, of course. Okay. Now, here's some examples. You're thinking, they walk into the room. Your thought is, will they explode? Is he about to explode again? Another one, almost like a flip extreme end of it, is like, if I tell her this now, will she withdraw? Is she going to shut down? Will she hear me out? Because again, you've seen the pattern over time, so you don't feel safe to actually express yourself, right? What about, will he criticize me, right? Will he criticize what I have to say right now, right? Explode is like the extreme, right? That's the extreme, but it does happen, right? And then criticism. We already know criticism eventually leads to divorce if you do enough of it, right? Criticism, withdraw. Criticism. Will she criticize? Will she criticize? Yeah, there are men that are afraid of being criticized by their wives, and some of them are on TikTok as we speak, yelling out loud, trying to prove that they are more masculine instead of them to go back to their wife and figure this thing out, right? Withdraw. Will she criticize the next thing I have to say? I'm gonna make her just go quiet, Jerry, because I don't, it's safer, but it also resentments building small by small. Another way that we say withdraw is like dismissive, like dismissive behavior, like somebody just, I beg, will they dismiss you? These are the questions that comes to mind for me right now. Will you get dismissed? Will I be dismissed? Okay, dismiss is a little bit different from this. Will he or she be dismissive? That's more like it, right? Because it's more like a feeling than it is actual active doing things. Dismissive is more like somebody just not giving you the attention you need to a particular issue, right? Will she or he be dismissive? As simple as that sounds, right? That is anxiety. That's anxiety playing out real good right there, right? What about shaming? Shaming, which we already know here, if you're part of the Prestige family, shaming is anti-seductive behavior, anti-seductive language, it's an anti-seducer. Right? What about shaming? Shaming, right? Will you get blamed? Blaming is not the same thing as holding you accountable, by the way. Blaming is just a consistent criticism, right? Blaming, insults. Some people, they throw little subliminal insults. They don't mean to, but their mouth is nasty. They call it being blunt sometimes. Right? Will you get shamed? These are what's the first step here, right? Unpredictable behavior makes you feel anxious. You can't predict. You don't know. You have these questions in your heart, so it creates anxiety, right? Yeah. So the reality is that people are not necessarily afraid of conflict, right? But the unpredictability is coming down to a matter of unpredictability is really what creates anxiety, because believe it or not, if they know what's to come, sometimes that may temporarily even feel safe. That may even feel safe temporarily, right? So people don't fear conflict. They don't fear conflict. They fear the unpredictability. They rather go into their shell. And that's the problem that most people are dealing with in their marriage. Now, I want to share with you what I call the safety ladder. Okay, so we're going to climb what I call the safety ladder. So let's get into this. Okay, well, let me put this down. The safety ladder. The safety ladder, guys. The safety ladder. So you want safety back in your marriage. Now I'm going to give you a universal roadmap. Every person's story is different, as you know, right? But we're going to get this together. The safety ladder, it's awesome. It's great, right? The first step. What is the first trigger in the safety ladder, right? We've talked about this in this series as well, but let's get into it. Consistency, because of time. Let's get into it. Consistency is what it starts with, right? So what is the next step after consistency? What happens? Because it's not just that simple. You might be consistent for the last 2 weeks, and then now you're expectant. You're pregnant. You have expectations that this should change something. Well, not so fast. Hold it, tiger. But let me just say this real quick, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to get through this safety ladder, right? But before we wrap up, let me just share this with you. If anything I've been talking about today sounds like your story and you find yourself thinking that I'm talking about your marriage, don't go back to guessing. The guess is consuming energy, is consuming your life, is consuming the quality of your life. Every marriage is different, guys. Every relationship has its own history, its own landmine, personalities, and blind spots. So that's why I offer the private discovery session, the 1 hour session. And what I will do is I will spend 1 hour with you to identify together. We work together to identify what's actually happening in your relationship and then help you gain some clarity on what the next best step is. So if you're ready for that, you simply go to getmymarriageback.com/discovery. Okay, getmymarriageback.com/discovery. That's where you want to go, and you book one of the available sessions this week on my calendar, and then we'll get you going. All right. So the link is also pinned into the description box. Okay. All right. And if you haven't done so, please make sure you hit the like button, share, subscribe, turn up your notifications. Share this with people that will value it. What is the next step after consistency, guys? What is the next step after someone is being consistent? The answers, we've kind of like talked about it today, but let me just go ahead and walk you through this because I think you'll benefit from it a great deal. After you've been consistent, that's the part that you're controlling, right? But really what you're trying to build is predictability. It's linking back to what we discussed a few coaching sessions ago, right? Trust, predictability. They don't decide to trust you. It is the predictability that ultimately controls that. What is next? What is next after that? If you're predictable, what happens? What would they naturally, subconsciously find themselves doing? Not a decision. They just find themselves doing it. Well, it's simple. It's called reliability. Does it sound like trust so far? I think we're getting closer to that. But remember, we're talking about safety today, right? Now we're moving closer and closer. What is next, guys? I'm waiting. Let me see if anybody is saying anything. Oh, you guys just like to listen. I know it's morning. It's morning time. Reliability. What happens after reliability, guys? What happens after reliability? I think we're getting closer, but it starts with not just safety, but emotional safety. Okay? They can relax a little bit, at least from inside out. They can feel a sense of relief. So there's a sense of emotional safety. Now, after emotional safety, because we're heading somewhere, guys. In fact, I'll tell you where we're heading. We're heading to trust. Okay? But between emotional safety and trust, there are two things. There are two things. Ladies, you want men to be vulnerable. You want them to be vulnerable finally, but all you do is just ask for it. But you don't have the time, let me guess, to walk through that process, right? You want them to be vulnerable? I gave you the answer already. Emotional safety naturally leads to vulnerability, guys. Vulnerability. It's not something that people control. They naturally do it when they feel emotionally safe. For a man, him feeling emotionally safe is that you're not going to throw his ego in his face. Because him operating from a place of ego is very much it's very much so about his primitive behavior. It's a survival thing. Sometimes emotional survival thing. Vulnerability. Okay? Vulnerability leads to what? I know what you always want. You want to be able to connect with this man, right? So I know you're asking him for vulnerability. But there's a lot of things that happens behind the scenes before we get to vulnerability, right? But I get you. I completely get you because I know what you were asking for. All the while, you're just looking for what? Connection. Basic human need, right? Connection is one of the basic human need, but you have to be willing to do the work. You can't just jump from unpredictable behavior to connection or to vulnerability. A man is not going to feel safe enough to be vulnerable with you if you keep saying that's what's wrong with this man. They don't want to be vulnerable. That tone enough is enough for me to run away from being vulnerable with you. Just that tone. What do you mean tone? But that's not what I said. Well, welcome to the real world. It's really almost never about what we said. It's about what people feel. No one cares about anything outside of the feelings. Yes, not just women. No one. Like everybody only care about their feelings when you really strip it all the way down. Right? So if you don't know how to nurture that, you don't have the skills, you don't have the game to nurture that, it won't happen. And of course, finally, we have trust. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is it. That's the formula right there. Trust is not built when your partner believes you. Trust is built when your partner can predict you. That's when trust is built. Okay? Trust is not built when your partner believes you. It is when you are predictable. All right. So, and on tomorrow, we're going to talk about why people shut down in marriage. We're going to get deeper into why people shut down in marriage. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what we discussed today. Just a quick wrap up. He walks into a room, anxiety, created this loop that eventually destroys the marriage. That's what we talked about today. Make sure you see everything and the complete breakdown. Okay. And the emotional safety loop is unpredictable behavior. It leads to anxiety, it leads to guardedness, leads to less communication, leads to distance, which is not a good thing. We're not talking about the distance makes the heart fonder now. We're talking about distance, which leads to more anxiety, leads to a very bad loop that creates even more unpredictable behavior. Then you have the safety ladder, which starts with consistency, predictability, leading to reliability, leading to emotional safety, vulnerability, connection, and of course, eventually trust. Okay, then of course we're talking about a romantic relationship here, right? So we can't leave without talking about how the attraction and the polarity works, right? You have the feminine energy, you have the masculine energy. The masculine energy, yes, provides safety, provides a container. So the feminine energy from an attraction standpoint, with respect to attraction being the goal, right, requires safety. Masculine leads, protects, grounds, provides, contains, build trust, right? He creates the container she can relax, open, and receive, all right? What about the feminine energy? It feels, it receives, it nurtures, it inspires, it creates connection, magnetizes, and then she opens when she feels safe. And when the masculine energy leads and feminine energy relaxes, attraction flows, connection deepens, love thrives. But when you've been living with each other and see finish don't enter, as in you start to take each other for granted, you start to see each other as roommates, you start to see each other as adults, finally. You thought you guys were just running kids, running around the house, and everybody is just doing their thing and just lovey-dovey, just like the movies, right? That has flown out the window, right? Now it's time to become adults. You now have to build something real. That's why we have a whole chapter in the book called Building Your Real Love, right? Not the infatuation that you had in the beginning, right? Chapter 7 on building your real love story. It gets real. It gets real, ladies and gentlemen. That's the safety ladder right there. All right. So if this sounds like anything that you want to build in your marriage and you feel like there's been some damages, you feel like I've basically been telling your story, you've asked your partner to go to therapy and they're like, what? I don't want to waste money, right? And all that kind of stuff. But you really know that this is worth investing in making sure you deploy this into your marriage. Then reach out, book a discovery session at www.getmymarriageback.com/discovery. Hopefully you've been enlightened, educated. We'll be back very, very soon.
Are you fighting to save a marriage or a relationship, or simply avoiding to end up in a broken or toxic one?
We've been there and you're in the right place. You see, inside this book, right, you will find and you will discover the secret to save a broken marriage, and you will learn how to build and attract the marriage of your dream.